Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High-Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Michael Wenderoth. Michael is an executive coach that has helped thousands of executives to ethically leverage power and politics to break through in their career and to ascend. And that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. We're going to talk about power balance, but we're going to look for how it can be used appropriately, because I'm sure many in the audience are already thinking of examples of where power and politics is something that you maybe shun away from in the office and in that environment. So I'm really excited to hear from Michael about how it can be used in a more ethical and appropriate way. So he's also appeared in Harvard Business Review and in Forbes as an author, sharing some of his contrarian views about this concept of power and the politics in the environment. So really excited about this. And he's the author of a book called Get Promoted, What You're Really Missing at Work That's Holding You Back. So very excited for today's interview. Michael, please do say hello to our audience and give us a little bit more about that very rich background that I know that you've got and what led you to be with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mick. And also, thanks to all the listeners out there for spending some time here as we dive more deeply and thoughtfully into this topic around power and politics, which, as you said, sets people off immediately. We have a lot of connotations that are associated with that word. You've given my background, and I think that the easiest way to kind of start this off, or to help people understand what I do, is to take their point of view. And many of the clients I work with, and you can ask yourself out there, those who are listening, have you ever felt frustrated, stalled, or overlooked at work and feel like there's a ceiling there, or you're missing something that's not making you more effective? You know, essentially, I am a coach who helps people through that, navigate that. And that could be things that you're happening at different levels in your career. It could be you are moving into territory, kind of ascending to be a manager or a leader. And you feel like the skills that got you there may not be the ones that also help you in that new situation. And you don't have resources or kind of a guide. So that's where I work. And Mick, I know you work as well. So I think we're going to have a good discussion about this because we are going to challenge you about some of your thinking and associations, particularly with power and politics. They are needed in organizations. We can talk about the backstory, what brought me to this and why I coach in this area. I had a long global career, worked in different environments, and I work with a very diverse and global customer base. But essentially, it is that pain that a lot of people have, and let's be very clear about this, good ethical people have a struggle with this because we see a lot of leaders who use power in very negative ways that damage organizations. So if we want to make organizations better, if we want to have an impact, it really behooves us to understand how these things work and how we can actually harness those things to help ourselves, our causes, or those around us in our organizations.
That's a good start, Michael, and thank you for setting the scene with that one. I would like to know how you got there, but let's start with that rich career that you've had. You've spent more than 20 years in China, I understand, and you now live in Spain and you've worked in different regions around the world. Tell us what you learnt from that experience, that multicultural experience along the way.
Well, there's two pieces here, and I know you've had a global career, and many of those out in the audience will have had as well. And so you're always adapting to new environments, whether that's culturally. I've also had the privilege of working in different industries, from tech to healthcare to consulting, as well as different size companies. And so, one of the things is as you're kind of navigating, and we're always going to move into new situations because the world is changing, is this ability to kind of adapt. And so one of the things of having a global career and working in these diverse spaces, I won't always say that's the best if you're trying to go to one really deliberate spot, right, within a company and build a domain expertise. But we can circle back to that about how you can flip that around and still use that as an expertise. Is understanding how you adapt and reinvent in different places. So I've had I would say I've had 4 or 5 careers already. They move in these cycles of 5 or 6 years. And so learning how to kind of move into a new space and adapt to that space, but also become effective, hopefully more quickly each time you do it, is one skill from that career. Again, been working a lot of it in China, Greater China, US, a lot of that in Silicon Valley, and then across parts of Europe. So very kind of global scope. The second piece here that I think is quite important around kind of this adaptability and from having worked from different places is that, and we see this in the press, that differences get played up a lot. And of course, there are differences among cultures and environments. But I do firmly believe that if we take the words of American poet Maya Angelou, she said, we're more alike than we are different. And so there are many elements of human behavior, of organizational behavior, that I would say are fundamental, and are similar across cultures. We all deep down want to be respected. Trust at the end of the day, if you build that strongly, okay? It may take nuances in how that's built in different places, but people want to feel good about themselves. So these are just some examples. And so I believe if we can kind of understand principles, because a lot of this is interpersonal, and think about how we build relationships with other people, you can take that across and navigate. Now, you're going to have to pick up cues in different places, but those principles will get you very far. And, principles are a piece that I really try to play up in the book, so that, because a lot of people are going to be coming at this from, they'll be down in Australia in mining. They will be in banking in New York. They'll be at a small tech company or startup, in Southeast Asia. So how do they adapt those things to their environment? And again, once you have more than 2 people, you've got power dynamics at work. You have politics going on. You can be a startup person. You're still trying to convince investors. You're CEO. You still report to a board. And of course, big corporation, you're always working with other people. So hopefully we can take some of these principles, and then people can, as we're talking through it, think about how that plays out in their particular situation.
There's some key things that you've already brought up there, Michael, and I'd like to explore that a little bit further. So this aspect of culture, but what I really like that is that you brought up is that there are fundamental human needs at play. And if you follow something like William Glasser's choice theory, you would say that they're survival, love and belonging, power, which is an element of mattering and respect in there. There's fun and there's freedom of choice and freedom from oppression. So there's these fundamental human needs at play. And some of the ones that you brought up trust, you brought up respect and to be valued, et cetera, right? So those needs are always there, regardless of which country you're in. What the bit that takes a little bit to learn, and if you're clever about it, you learn these things very quickly, is what is the method in that culture of showing respect. And showing respect in Taiwan is very different to showing respect in China, is very different to showing respect in the Philippines, in Australia, in the US, in Spain. So it's learning the customs so that you can then show that respect, which is the fundamental thing that you're trying to do. How does that sit with you?
I agree with that. I think that in all things, because again, everyone's trying to reduce stuff to sound bites, which is why we need to have a deep conversation around this, is having worked globally, sometimes when they parachute you into a new place, some outside expert will come in and tell you this is what you got to do. And having been very global, being mixed race myself, and seeing, for example, China, it's a billion people, so it's very hard to reduce that to like, here are how Chinese people act. I think the danger of going too far with that is you can start to characterize and even going further, stereotype a particular place about this is the way you would show respect. Well, that may be like, let's say China, which is near and dear to me, in a large state-owned company with someone who's 60 years old is going to be very different now to the generation in China specifically, who's like 20 years old in Shanghai in a tech firm, in a startup. So they grew up with slightly different values. There's still a core culture. So I think, yes, learning the nuances are important, but to be careful when it goes over into everyone acts like this, and I should just parrot these, exactly what you said at the beginning. We want to avoid kind of these caricatures, sound bites, kind of universally, that's how you act. And so I think you have to kind of find that middle ground and be nuanced about it.
And I like what you said about generational, and something that you said a while back, but I didn't play on it. You mentioned, as an example, the mining industry. So the mining industry in Australia, the way that you would show respect and show someone that they matter and that they're valued is very different there compared to the banking industry in Australia, right? So it can be by sector, it can be by generation. There's all kinds of things. Really good, Michael. Key question, because we're going to start now talking about these areas around power and politics and power balance and all of these things. What is common in that realm as you've traveled around the world?
Well, the commonality is that it exists everywhere. Okay. Again, once you've got two people together, and as that expands, there's always power dynamics at play. And this is the old expression, right? Power is there. People can kind of describe what it looks like, its manifestations, but they can't really define it. And it's been called, the organization's last dirty secret, because it's there, but people can't quite put their fingers on it. So one is recognizing that power dynamics are at work. And we were all, if we talk about, which I think is important, what's going on at the moment, particularly in certain countries, around equity, inclusion, these topics are very important, but I don't think you can have an honest conversation about those things unless you acknowledge power dynamics. There are those in the organization, it's not always at the top positional, who have more power, or in political systems. We can extend this beyond organizations to countries, other environments. And it behooves us to understand how those power dynamics work, because power actually can become very sticky. We could talk about that more, but power systems can reinforce themselves, right? Which is why we get some of these imbalances. Those who have power to go very extreme, write or rewrite the rules, oftentimes in ways that favor them. They also sometimes don't see the benefit and the power they have, and they will do kind of power building behaviors. They work with others who are powerful. And those who have less power because perhaps power has been used against them, will not, and the book will talk about some of the things that you can do that build power, will not do some of those strategies for a variety of reasons. And so the system can be reinforcing. And so unless you can kind of understand how that's working, it's hard to think about how we get to the more just world that we're seeking. And so that's very universal. And then politics, the other part, politics very simply is about how, decisions get made in groups. And that's, there are formal mechanisms, voting, whatever, corporate governance, but there's also just tons of informal. Every day, like you and I are interacting in a meeting, a decision is made. Sometimes that may be, I'm the boss, I'll make it. Or there's a convincing argument from one person's stronger arguing persuasively for whatever reason. And so those are informal mechanisms. And in an organization where you've got interdependence, you probably have diversity of thought, and then scarcity of resources. So those three ingredients, interdependence, diversity, scarcity of resources. Anytime you've got that, there's going to be disagreement, conflict, or things need to get resolved. Like who gets what budget, who gets promoted, these types of things. So if you think about it, politics is the mechanism by which those get resolved. Okay, not to get too academic about it, and then power comes into play here because someone has more sway, more influence, and therefore those things will happen. And they're not always fair or even rational. And this is the important part, right? Because we're people, we're not run by machines yet. AI introducing here can do some very interesting and powerful things to help us unbias ourselves. But until that day, there's a lot of bias. And yeah, unfortunately, us personally, us in organizations will make irrational decisions, but they can be very predictable. And so the more we know about that, whether that's learning about social science literature, seeing things at play, we can manage those. If we want to fix the system, we need to understand how it works, is the kind of takeaway there. But those are the commonalities, right, around everywhere. These two things are like the air we breathe.
So there's lots to unpack there, and we will do that. That's what we do on this show. We're going to dive deep into many of the things that you've just spoken about, Michael. I'm going to come back and we're going to explore some of the positives and negatives that come along with everything that you just said. It's absolutely true. Bias exists. Everyone is biased. It's what we do with that bias that makes a difference. And we're not rational beings. We're emotional beings that try to rationalize the world through other ways. So, and that will be part of what we talk about for sure. What I want to know before we do dig deeper, how does Michael Wenderoth decide one day, this is what I'm going to do. This is my gig. I'm going to help executives to ethically leverage power to advance and to do great things.
Yeah, so this is, as we kind of look back and we think about the moments that move us into different areas, there are two parts. I had a long corporate career, and the things that I loved were helping and developing people on my teams. And I know that's what drives you as well. And of course, the higher you move up, the more important politics is. And in large, at least a lot of public corporations, it's about selling, right? It's this very capitalist thing about hitting your numbers. Not every place, but so the amount of stuff that I did in that regard started to shift dramatically, and less of I could go out and ride with my sales reps. I could sit down with the team and do things. That had to be part of what I did, but I got less of that. So number one, there was this part around helping people. But the second is, and we can go back to those moments and those stories where, mid-career, you kind of get curious, right? We're all used to comparison. So you kind of go out and look at peers from university or from business school or former colleagues, right, in different places I'd worked. Who's getting ahead? Who seems to be doing really well? Who's not? And also getting the phone calls. And I mentioned this in the book, so I won't spoil this, but a friend calls, and he's the kind of one I'm saying, this is the person we want as a CEO, as a leader. Strong, ethical, team player, brilliant. And he's like, I just got fired. I got fired, right? The rug got pulled out from under me. And he used, right, in a power play. And for everyone listening out there, right, a lot of people get derailed. We have all had it, much greater percentage of people than you think. So you're not alone. But that's a very painful moment. And it was very painful for me to see, how did this happen to him? How did this happen? And then also looking around and like the people that I thought were great, smart, hardworking, et cetera, were getting stalled, like what I was saying before. And sometimes it's very surprising, more than you think, of who is getting ahead. And you're saying, these research would show we elect and we select a lot of very narcissistic leaders, those who promise us lots of things, who appear powerful. And so there was that deep piece that said, what's going on, right? Our first impulse on a lot of this stuff is to get very angry about it. Like, this is totally unfair. This is totally unjust. But then, and I encourage everyone else who's out there who has that feeling as they watch someone else, or they get passed over for a second time, who is getting promoted. And to also just kind of pull back and be curious for a moment. And that's what I did. I said, well, what's going on? Why are certain people moving ahead? Maybe even being in positions where they have more influence, where all these good people are literally on the sideline or they're not in the game having an impact. And the evidence is very interesting, which is what I share in the book and why a lot of the prescriptions I've got. But I wanted to help the people to say, maybe they can learn something of what does get you ahead or increases your impact, but without becoming the sharks or the narcissists, the despots or the bad bosses. I remember one of your podcasts that struck me. One of the bad bosses that they so despised. Because there are things that we can learn from the people who do get ahead for a variety of strong reasons that we talked about before in the social sciences. So how can you harness that for your objectives? I'll stay away from saying good, but for whatever that is that you say, promoted, impact, causes, etc.
So that's
what drove me to become an executive coach in this particular area of focus, helping people navigate that.
That last thing you said, that's something that we do talk a lot about on the show, is having a look around you and see what's working for other people, not to mimic them or to become a clone of someone else, but just learn what's working, what's not working for them. If you've got a particularly inspirational leader, what was it about that leader that you really liked? If there's someone that is a horrible boss, what was it that they did that really drove you insane or demotivated you or whatever the case may be? And to kind of pocket all of those so that you've got all of these lessons learned. We call it an amalgam leader, where you build a picture of a leader that's the sum of all of the virtuous attributes of leaders before you, and jettisoning maybe some of the baggage that comes along with it. Because there's no single leader in the world that's perfect at everything. And if anyone claims to be, then we've got a problem, right? So yeah, I like this mindset that you're talking about there. Tell me what you mean by ethically leverage.
So let's take that example you were using, and I think this is a good illustration of it. Looking around, and it's one of the exercises I have people do too, the virtuous leaders or the bad ones, what are the things they do? If we get non-judgmental for a second, is to look at people who are successful. Okay, that has lots of either the ones who rose or the ones who seem to be having an impact. And we particularly have those averse reactions to the ones who we feel like are narcissistic or highly political, right? All those adjectives. And I'd say to flip this for a second and to just say, okay, what is it that they're doing whether you like that or not, whether you feel that's ethical or not, that seems to be effective, because leadership is about being effective. Let's be clear about that. Getting things done, steering the ship. And so if we took an example here and say, okay, this one individual shows up in a very strong way, sounds very definitive. Okay. And maybe they're blowing a little bit of smoke. They're bending the truth a little bit or framing things in a particular way that supports their causes or whatever. Okay, so the negative judgment comes in. This is like a total con artist. And to say, but actually part of what they do is they're very good at framing and helping lead people towards something. Okay, because the research would show that we do attribute a powerful leader in some ways to being confident. Okay, now this is not to say now you should just go lie, although again, a lot of people are doing that and getting ahead. But it's to say maybe if we shift some of the vocabulary here, they're good at framing. They're good at thinking about what do other people need to hear or to help them. And so in this one example, we can say, okay, you can leverage some of the principles here of what builds power and how to be political, okay, without being a liar, without being, blowing smoke up everyone, but to think about how you show up and how you present things in ways that gets people to line up, with you. And so I think that's a subtle nuance here. And ethics, okay, you should have, an expert on the field of ethics here, because I think ethics is an area that you've got to think deeply about and how it means to you personally. Your values come into play, laws come into play, et cetera. But people get very narrow about some of these things. And so if you kind of think broadly and then you think about what is the principle that they use there that was very effective, because we see so many of these types of people rise. It is not fair, right? And this hurts certain groups. But how might you harness some of those things? And to sometimes take a deep look at yourself, right? I work a good swath of folks I work with come from a technical background. They're moving into management. And so sometimes on their communication techniques, they got to think about who's on the other side. They string 20 things together. They get very technical. And it's the other side is looking for one or two things. Maybe that's a story, something that connects to the benefit, and they need to hear it very concisely. Or they need to be moved to kind of rally support. And so is that being unethical to kind of change how you frame and present something? No, it's harnessing the principles and it's using that to help yourself, your causes advance.
It's using a skill set to advance something that is in congruence with your own values and beliefs. I'm going to get political here for a moment, and I know I'm about to run the risk of alienating and upsetting part of my audience. So I'll choose my words carefully, but I'll also be still pretty direct. I don't agree with the politics of Donald Trump generally. Just generally. I won't go into anything in specific, but I generally don't agree with his politics. But do I admire his ability to rally a crowd into an absolute, dizzy kind of, to get people chanting and all that kind of stuff? So when I listen to you, Michael, I'm thinking about, imagine having that skill, that ability, and flipping it over and going, well, imagine if we could get that group of people that are then highly motivated, highly spirited to do something like end racism once and for all, to get rid of gender balance issues in corporate world. So take that skill set that Donald Trump has got, which I do have to admit I admire, but then use it in a way that's more congruent with my own personal values and beliefs. Is that what I'm hearing there?
That is exactly. And I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I think we need to talk about these things. I think he is a good example. We'll put the politics and what we think about it aside. And I think it troubles some people to think about what they can learn from him. But this is an example. And He's very good at managing a narrative. He will bring people to his side, whether you like it or not, through various means. And then he ascended to the highest, most powerful position in the land. And this goes back to the example before. There are a lot of very smart, hardworking other politicians who are not in the game, who are not affecting the rules. And so if we can help those people be thoughtful but strategic about what they can do to help themselves and their causes, because again, it's very painful to see when they hit those ceilings or they get sidelined. And we all want to see impact. And so thinking about power simply as a force is very useful here. And so what are the pieces that help you build power or navigate it?
And that's the key. That person that then does have good values and good ethics and good beliefs that align to your own values and beliefs. Like everyone's got their own values and beliefs. I'm not here to challenge anyone on their values and beliefs. But that person that is able to harness those skills of power, those skills of persuasion, their impact on the world can be multiplied many times over compared to, I'll just say it nicely, but compared to just sitting there and maybe bickering and going, oh, I can't get on in this world because people are always looking past me, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you learn some of these skills, you will be able to then bring your values forward. I do have a challenge with this that's going to come up about authenticity, et cetera, but I fully get what you're getting at, Michael. All right, the next line of thought that I want to talk about, you mentioned that as soon as you have two or more people in a room, you have a power dynamic. Tell me what role relationships play in all of this.
So, I mean, relationships is very kind of broad here. But the power dynamic that's kind of this invisible between me and you, let's say you're my boss, okay? You probably, and we'll make some assumptions here because of position. It doesn't have to necessarily be the case. You were selected, right, by the CEO to be in your role. You've been given certain resources. You can do certain things. So you by default have, and you probably determine my ratings, my bonus, et cetera. And so we are kind of working together towards some end. But there's that dynamic, right? So if I'm saying something that's upsetting to you, you could, if you so chose, easily exercise some of that power, right? In ways affects my bonus, affects the work that I do, et cetera. Whereas it's a lot easier for you, right? To say certain things. So I have to be kind of careful and thinking about this relationship and this dynamic that's existing in terms of how I might be interacting with you or persuading with you. So again, depending on what level our relationship is at, I'm like, Mick, that's just a shitty idea. Or that's just terrible. Or I do that in public and kind of, make you look bad in front of other key people who are your stakeholders and so forth. I'm running the risk. Okay, maybe that's some radical candor that's misplaced, but I'm running the risk here of damaging a relationship that is probably going to hurt me more because of the power dynamic at work. And so I think we need to be attentive to these things, peers, above, et cetera, as you tread and think about how to get things done. Because again, there's interdependence and things going on. So I want to make sure I kind of answer that question because it could be very broad. Maybe you were going a different area.
No, actually, you've taken us in a good direction. I want to go deeper. So one of the things that I'm hearing here is an element of essentially emotional intelligence. But in this case, you're picking up the emotional intelligence to read the room of what that power dynamic is and how it's going to play out. And if you're lucky enough, and I pride myself on this, won't get it 100% right every day, but I pride myself on providing an environment of psychological safety where I reward people when they speak up and say, hey, Mick, I don't agree with this direction, or have you thought of this, or I've got a different idea. I reward people for speaking up. But I've also been in situations, to be fair, I've been in situations where I've had bosses that did the same. That's kind of where I learnt it, right? So I've had bosses that have supported me to speak up and all that kind of stuff in the past. But I can guarantee you, I can list, without naming them right now on a podcast, but I can list bosses that I've had that I would never have done that, because I know that the retribution or the judgment was coming, all right? So part of the dynamic, what I'm hearing, this is what I want to test with you. Part of the dynamic is not just knowing whether that power dynamic exists, like you said, signing off your bonus, signing off your rating, am I going to be in line for the next promotion? All of those things, that power dynamic kind of already almost exists by default, but how is that dynamic going to be used? And is the person that I'm talking to going to use it in going to use your word again, ethical way, or am I in fear of retribution and judgment right there on the spot? So it's almost like an EI, it's an EQ, it's an emotional intelligence of read the dynamic, accept that it exists, but then read how is it going to be used. How does that sit with you?
No, exactly. And I will just add to that the how it's going to be used. So emotional intelligence, people can read Daniel Goleman. There's also the whole piece, I think it's called slightly different, political skills, Gerald Ferris. I unpack those things in my book. This is around social astuteness, understanding where other people are coming from, that interpersonal influence and relationships. And, I think our more senior people in the audience are like, oh, these are just kind of rookie mistakes. Like if you're not reading that in the room, but this is very fundamental. You need to read those dynamics and how they might be used against, in the actual situation, and navigate that, because that's around there and it's real. Very real. So, this is fundamental of thinking about it, and a simple exercise people can do, because I think the currency of the day of what you've said there, of your good bosses and the habits of creating that space, allowing for diversity of opinion, coming back at you, that is the ideal, but it sadly doesn't always exist. And so to be attentive, particularly if you're starting a job or you're in a new environment, to kind of scan what is being rewarded, what are people doing, to be a little bit of an anthropologist before you wade in, or to do small things before kind of diving to see if those get rewarded or accepted, or if there's retribution. So we all want to trust other people. I say be careful and kind of trust but verify, and to take steps there.
So we had a really great episode with Stephen Shedleski not long back, and we spoke a lot about culture dynamics on that occasion. And we spoke about what behavior is rewarded, what behavior is tolerated, and what behavior is not tolerated. And this is what sets the culture. And what I'm hearing from you here is then having your finger on the pulse, scanning the environment, observing those things very clearly, including how is power dynamics being applied in that environment, and just learning every day. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. Is that what I'm hearing there?
Yes. And particularly the higher you go up, you're going to have to work with other people. A lot of it's influencing through others. And oftentimes you will be put in situations to work with people that you don't particularly like or are very skilled at certain things in this area, the political side. And so to understand what makes them tick, I'm fond of saying, yes, we need to know our own true north. Okay, so having power without a true north, that can be very dangerous. But at the same time, you need to know what's the motivations, what's in, wrapped in people's identity or in their self-interest, because you need to be aware of that. It's like a negotiation a lot of times. And so to be very in tune with that, so you figure out how to work with them. And if you pick up enough of these things and you don't like it, and you don't like what's being rewarded, I am all for saying, right, don't bang your head against the wall and, that it could be a toxic culture that is going to be very hard to change.
You picked up my next question beautifully.
Go somewhere else or create the environment elsewhere. And so I'd say and we're in the great resignation. So the shift is moving towards employees. It won't always be that way. Everyone should have agency. Everyone should have more power. And I think that creates a good and healthy balance for
you picked up my next question quite beautifully, and I think you've already covered it. So I'll just summarize just a little bit. It would be, do that scanning, look around, what's working, what's not working for others, but stay true to your own values and beliefs. And if you see some behaviors that are incongruent with your values and beliefs, don't just do it because other people do it. Try and do it your own way. And then if that doesn't work and you find yourself in a toxic culture, that's when you can maybe look at some alternate options. All right, we have danced around this already a little bit, so let's see. We talk a lot about encouraging people to turn up as their authentic self. All right, we want that. People cherish that. They cherish a leader that is able to turn up as their authentic self. Where is the line here between going, okay, yeah, but to get on around here, I need to play this, I need to play that. How does someone still show up as their authentic self in that environment?
So this is a loaded word, and I think it's been used a lot, and people have different definitions of it. So this is where it helps to have the nuanced conversation. I was recently writing a piece about this, and there's a section in my book about it. But authenticity, some people say, well, it's true to myself. And the first question you ask is, well, to what self, right? The self before in your past, is that some core values that you have? Because we're constantly evolving as individuals. And the taken to kind of the extreme, and I say this because I have heard people use this in different contexts. Well, I can't say that because that's just not authentic, or what I believe, or that authenticity sometimes, if the definition someone holds, can actually force this rigidity of, let's take the simple example I used before of a technical manager who believes that facts and data and sending them out, everyone should see that. So that's my authentic self. I'm an engineer, so therefore I do that. Again, a simple example here. Whereas being more effective would be perhaps telling that in a different way. Okay, well, if you want to be effective, and they're still saying, well, I want to be effective, and that's being authentic, maybe to kind of learn some new skills. And there's also a definition of authenticity of, being kind of true to some of those values, but continuing to grow. So sometimes the bottom line here is that authenticity can force us to be very rigid about how we think about ourselves, and that we won't go learn new things because we have this very fixed definition of how you might have to show up for a leader. You might not be confident, or your authentic self will say, I don't really know the answer to the situation. But people also need to have some confidence. That doesn't mean you can say, hey, we're going to figure this out. We're figuring out what's going on. But going up there and saying, like, I have no idea, and not inspiring hope or confidence can also create problems, both for yourself and for that organization you might be leading. So the question here around kind of authenticity, I think you have to think about the definition. And we are saying here, think about also what the situation is calling for. Think about how that kind of fits with what you're stuck with, right? Whether that's a value or so forth. And people get they only kind of see two things, right? Oh, I have to show up like strong and banging on a table and angry to look decisive. Well, there's many shades of decisive. And you probably don't want to do that, whether you're a white male or a female, the bang on the table. And so I hesitate to say kind of playing, right? But I think about it as kind of experimenting with ourselves to develop new skills that are going to be needed in ways, sure, I mean, I hate using the definition again, but that may be authentic to ourselves. And again, because the word gets used out there so much, it's in every TED talk and so forth, I think we need to kind of unpack that more. And I hope that's helped a little. We can continue that conversation.
That was quite good, Michael. And I'll play out a little bit more, and let's use the gender balance issue as our card here to expand it a little bit further, where some of this is coming from. So there's no denying that we've got a gender balance issue in the corporate world. We've got gender balance and gender bias issues in all kinds of aspects of our lives. But let's just go with the gender balance in the corporate world. We've got gender balance issues in job families, which sometimes can be completely the other way, by the way. You can have job families that are almost exclusively female dominated, which are also not good for diversity of thought either. But we have gender balance in job families. We have gender balance when it comes to the gender balance issues, when it comes to glass ceiling, where female executives feel like that they can't crack through, or they don't even get to the executive ranks in the first place. They're the ones that often get to that point in their career where they feel like they're going nowhere, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The authenticity where this comes in is, I'm going to say that there was an era where women leaders felt that the only way that they could win in a male-dominated world is to start behaving just like the rest of the gorillas in the room. And I'm being emotive in that language on purpose, but you would have strong leaders like Margaret Thatcher and the like that would be the role models of, and everyone's had them in their business at some point. You'd have this, I'm going to call it alpha male in a female suit, right? So they thought that the only way that they could crack it was to be like everyone else. I'm hoping that we're starting to see people like Jacinta Ardern in New Zealand to show that you can be an incredible woman leader and still be your authentic self and not just play the role, or I'm doing it like this because that's what everyone else was doing. That's what I'm getting at with authenticity. Any thoughts on that?
I think this is very real, and so it behooves us to talk about that. We still very much, live in a male-dominated, world, white male in many places, and so you can think about this as kind of, who's holding those positions of power, because oftentimes what they then define as leadership or the behaviors are the things that they promote. I mean, how many times have I done, about half my clients are women executives, and that I've done 360 reviews, and up at the top says, they're just not showing up as a leader. When we get that as coaches, we're like, well, tell me more about that. What does that mean? Doesn't seem certain or decisive around certain stuff. And could go on, but essentially they're kind of saying they want, to see more of these, to use your, description here, which we use as a character, right? Stronger male alpha like characteristics, which again, going back to our previous point, can be much wider in terms of how that's doing. But it's a very real thing that the women executives who I work with have to face. It's that double bind, that, well, they're darned if they do kind of show up like that. But then if they go to an extreme, they have all these, because of the stereotypes, women don't act that way. And, they're the B word, and there are other things that they're penalized for it. And this can happen to lots of groups. So it is a tightrope that has to be walked. And so thinking about how can you still signal some of those things without necessarily mimicking behaviors that aren't going to work for you. And to fix this is kind of, there's larger things at play, but a lot of these executives, and I think many of the listeners out there is, well, what do I do next week? I have a window of a year kind of in my career where I have to face this stuff now as the system exists. And so one is to walk some of those things. And it is a process, right? You have to kind of think through, and it is frustrating that you have to do that, of navigating that tightrope. But I think too, that there's lots of things here which we can explore. And I know you talk about as well, but this ability to build strong relationships, kind of sponsors, allies up in the organization. And so as the more that we see the types of leaders that you were talking about, the diversity of leadership, them bringing this new part into the dialogue, promoting, to our point before, those who are exhibiting strong leadership in different ways. So as you start to get a critical mass, and again, good research on this, but as you get a critical mass of those things, that starts to move into what gets rewarded, the culture, the mainstream. But you need to get some of those people in power so they can make some of those things happen. And again, it's not to mean you have to be CEO or president, but you need to be in positions of influence and impact.
Yeah, really good, Michael. And it won't happen overnight. It's going at a glacial speed. I'd like to see us move a lot faster, but I like a lot of the things that you're hearing here. The first thing I would say is I think many of us need to rethink and challenge the attributes that we look for in a leader, and to break those down and to get away from a stereotypical leader and work out what were the qualities, not the behaviors, the qualities. What were the qualities of those leaders? And then if there's a strong female leader coming through, I'll be careful with the word strong. I'll just say leader, a female leader that's got some very nice attributes and skill sets to bring to the table. Allow them to show up as their authentic self and bring those qualities through in a different form, not in a cookie cutter form of here's a mimic of all of the leaders before her. That's what I'd like to see. And then people could start showing up as their authentic self. So have a deep think about what you're looking for in a leader and look at the qualities and the attributes, not the behaviors, for a moment. And then let someone else come through. It's a little bit like we said about culture very early in the interview, Michael. Have a think about everyone wants to be respected. But to be respected in Japan is very different to being respected in Taiwan. You use different methods. So the quality is respect. Now let's let people show up as their authentic self and show respect in their way. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I would just add one nuance here and a point for people to think about too, because we do talk about showing up as your authentic self. And I would say as a point of reflection is also that we are constantly taking on different roles. I hesitate to use the word chameleon or shapeshifter, but what is needed in particular situations, right? You need to show up kind of as more supportive in this one or more challenging. And there can be times, right, where we might feel like we're acting and what the situation calls for. But I would also call that a form of authenticity, right? Okay. If you are understanding the interpersonal dynamics, this is not the time to dig into someone and criticize them. This is the time to kind of support them and build that relationship so they will listen to you around a point. And so I'd say, think about too what the situation calls for, because that might be the better, the more authentic response.
We had a wonderful interview recently with Dr. Julie Pham, and this has not gone to air yet, but by the time your episode goes to air, it would have. And we spoke about the 7 forms of respect. She's the author of that book, and she brought something brand new that I hadn't considered before, and I loved it. So we on the show talk about promoting people from the golden rule to the platinum rule. So the golden rule, treating other people the way that you want to be treated. The platinum rule, treating other people the way they want to be treated, which means reading the room and understanding their needs and having that level of flexibility. Her one was the rubber band rule, that you'll stretch and you'll accommodate and you'll do things all within the boundaries of your values and beliefs. And when you go beyond those, the rubber band snaps. And I thought that was really good. So you're right, shapeshifter, chameleon, within the frame of who you really are. So not outside the frame of who you really are, because people pick up on that. David Knorr tells us, most everyone's got a BS radar. And when you start showing up where you're out of your container, use the shapeshifter kind of approach where you've shifted completely beyond your container, that's what rubs people the wrong way. That's really good, Michael. I'm really enjoying this.
I love it too. And I love that you brought in that image of the rubber band. Because I think sometimes we all have this kind of small rubber band, and it is kind of stretching it. I sometimes call it the toolkit that you're carrying around. You're going to need a wider toolkit, and you want to pull from certain things that are going to help you. Because that old adage, right? If all you've got is a hammer, everything's a nail.
Everything's a nail. Yeah.
And apply that to the qualities and your strategies is really important. So when you get people to think about that, because most of your listeners and the people we work with, they have a growth mindset. They want to learn new things. If you get them to think about it as learning versus I got to go ape this behavior, they're going to have a much more welcoming approach to that.
So what I'm picking up so far, Michael, and I want to summarize this now before we go further on relationships. If you ignore the power dynamics, if you ignore the politics, you will never be successful and you'll never achieve the change that you want to see in the world. So you need to be able to read it. You need to be able to read the room, read those dynamics. You need to be able to sometimes play the game, but play the game in your authentic skin. That's what I'm looking for people to do. And if they ignore it and go, well, no, I don't play politics or I don't go into that, then nothing will change, right? So don't ignore it, but also don't just mimic those before you and trade away your values and beliefs and turn up as someone that you're not. That's my takeaway so far. How does that sound to you?
Yes, I think it's a critical skill, career skill that people should have and need, unless, of course, there's some individual contributor who works in a bubble, has some expertise that they don't need to work with other people. But I think that's very few and far between the people we see like that.
All right, very good. Now, relationships. Let's get a bit deeper into that. It is all about other people. Leadership is all about how you relate to other human beings. We teach all kinds of techniques and all those things, but at the end of the day, it's how you relate to other human beings. And you spoke before about having sponsors and having those, David Knorr calls them curve benders, those people that will go out of their way to help you and to be there for you when you fall too, like allow you to scrape your knees and then be there when you fall and then be there when you succeed, all of those things. So tell me more about your perspective about these relationships.
Well, one, we've talked about how critical that is because you're working through others and in very interdependent environments. The relationships are important. I would take this in a slightly different dimension to go back to kind of hard evidence about what propels people. So your network and your social capital are a huge driver of career success. Lots of studies have shown this. And I encourage people to think about this on a couple different dimensions. One, this idea of sponsorship is so critical. Having those people, whether that is the boss, kind of advisors, or people who help pull you through, they are the ones. Sponsorship is not just mentorship, right? Those people are kind of telling you stuff, but sponsors, the ones, curve bender to use your words, they're talking about you, in the rooms when decisions are made. When informal opportunities come up, you come to mind, they put themselves forward, right? You want to distinguish that you've got a sponsor. And then simply to this idea kind of with relationships of putting yourself in positions that are valuable to the organization or what things are valuable to other people, and being helpful with that. And there can be very strategic positions, brokerage roles, filling kind of gaps in company, weak ties. We get siloed in organizations. If we're always talking to the same people, if you're connecting with other groups, you can bring in valuable information, but it's about value. And so those pieces combined with the relationships are the glue that one, gets stuff done, and two, will help you, because those things they generate lots of good things, visibility, deepen relationships, bring value. And that at the end of the day, is what helps drive things. If we're looking at one of the key drivers, I'm not saying that your performance doesn't matter, but in a lot of cases, those elements are the thing that can supercharge it.
I think it's really critical that everyone think about that. So invest in those relationships. Don't do it cynically either, by the way. So you're not investing in relationships because you want something back. You're investing in relationships because you genuinely want to add value and help other people, and then good things will come. And the fact that some of those might end up being your sponsor and being in a position of influence will no doubt help. If you do that, people see it. If you invest in relationships and you genuinely help people and get out of your bubble in this respect, people will see it and people will respect it. The question I've got here is, how do we make sure that this relationship element doesn't end up in nepotism, doesn't end up in favoritism, doesn't end up in exclusion of people that aren't in the clique, so to speak?
Yeah, so this is the dynamic that's kind of there that you need to be attuned in. And I think the more that leaders are exposed to these forces that are going on, okay, and they see how it can be helpful, but also some of these downsides. So one, there's I think awareness that we can help prevent some of these things. Two, I mean, as you do these things, I always encourage people to think about, why are you doing it? And what are some of the things, like when you have, more influence or power, how do you kind of have a check on yourself, right? That you're not always listening to the same people who flatter you or who are doing things for you. Like, what about the other people in the room who might have value, who are quiet or whatever? And so there's certain kind of structural or personal things we can do. I mean, it's what I work on my coaching, there's parts in my book, but to give like an example here, if you're in a cockpit and you're the pilot and you're not listening to anyone else, and if something else could be, going on, and you're shooting any messenger who's bringing you contrary information to what you think, and you're only listening to like a particular person, then you got a problem. So what's a structural thing you can do there is you have a co-pilot and create that space, like you said, where they can challenge you. You're not going to shoot the messenger, et cetera. So there are things like that we can do kind of personally, recognizing that the biases are at work, structurally set them up in the organization. And then we can talk about performance reviews. We can talk about who gets hired. We can talk about these types of things that you can build into, like your meeting. Your meetings, people share stuff on a piece of paper first, right? And then there's equal airtime versus what almost typically happens today, despite all the evidence we know. You give all the airtime to one person who hogs it. And then that person's dominant, and therefore all the other opinions are left out. Oh, and then that person also is viewed as smarter by the boss and then gets promoted, et cetera, et cetera.
There is something there for us all to be aware of. Great descriptions there, by the way, Michael. I really enjoyed that. But making sure that dominant voice in the room, that persuasive person who's charismatic, et cetera, is not a blind spot for you, that you're not shutting out other voices that you need to hear. Really good. All right,
and can I add just one point, because I had an interesting conversation about this yesterday. And so I think that there's part there incumbent on leaders. I'm not always confident that leaders will do these things because they don't see it. They don't believe that it exists. But the other part is also, and I encourage those who are the quieter ones in the room, there's also the part of agency and realizing, hey, there are these kind of principles at work. Because I have a bunch of Asian clients, and they're typically quieter and more reserved, very thoughtful. And so if the boss isn't doing certain things, or you're maybe like, let's say in an American context where that may gets rewarded more, you are probably going to need to speak up some more. Okay? Because sometimes that's associated with, they're not confident or things like that. And so And if you have trust with your boss, to start bringing that up, like that's a cultural thing, but you also want to bring those up. So look for opportunities. And so I think that there's that part too of, you also need to advocate for yourself. You also need to be part of that conversation. So don't just let that kind of get eroded over top of you.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. I think that's a balance there, right? So it's incumbent on the leader to create an environment where everyone has a platform and their voice can be heard and their opinions valued. But then, and I'm clearly an extreme extrovert, Michael, and so I don't want to sound like I'm preaching to the introverts, but the introverts do need to find their voice as well and to take that opportunity when it's presented to them. I think that's a fair thing to say. All right, let's get into one particular thing in Get Promoted. I'd like to talk about your 3-part framework. That was really interesting. You talk about a rock, a map, and a snowball. Tell us all about that.
Sure. So that's the framework of the book. And there's a lot of good books around power and power dynamics to understand it. But again, what we've been talking about here is how you work through it yourself, because a lot of us, especially really thoughtful, good people, if we can use that word, have a lot of challenges with power because of the negative associations. Okay. And so kind of working through it, and this is where coaching particularly helps. You need someone to talk through. You need to be thinking about how to reframe things, experiment to fit it into what's authentic for you, or expanding that definition of authentic. And so the framework, the rock, the map, and the snowball, the rock is the piece, and I'll put this in simpler terms. The rock is about getting real. The map is about getting strategic. And the snowball is about getting doing. Short piece on each here. Rock, getting real, there's a lot of good evidence out there. I know you read it. I read it. There's a lot of people who just talk, right? Sometimes CEOs are the worst because they will just tell you what, they want you to hear. They will rewrite their history. And so like that fundamental thing we talked at the beginning is what's causing certain people to rise and not. Very good social science research dating back to the 60s, the 70s, that's buried, that doesn't get read. And so let's look at the evidence, the hard evidence. Because if you want to change a system, again, understand how it works. Understand how it works. The map about getting strategic is understand the landscape, the context that you operate in. We talked about a couple pieces. Go and look, study what's happening there. Again, that point, you have power, but no, true north, disaster. But if you've got this true north, but no power, you're never going to cross. It's like daydreaming. And so to get strategic, what is the strategy? What are the levers? And a lot of that is laden with people who are there to help you, to accelerate you, who may be there blocking you. So you got to think about how you navigate around that. And then the snowball, which is about get doing. So a snowball doesn't grow unless you give it a push. And, part of this is these things are very much in our heads because of cultural, what we hear, our values. I don't do power. Oh, politics. Again, the reframe can help here. But when you take those experiments and you do certain things, okay, instead of going attacking that person, let me first pick out something, not to be fake, but I want to point out something they do well. Okay. Build that relationship because you're going to have to work with them. If you think about those experiments or steps, that action can start to lead to new insights. We grow when we try new behaviors. When you rode a bike, you didn't first read the manual, you kind of got on, you messed up a couple times. So the snowball, nothing happens unless something moves. So you and I could be talking about this here, Mick, forever, but unless we took one step. You want to be smart about what you're doing. Think about what the consequences, but is this thing in my head or how could I go validate that by trying it for a week or two? Simple behaviors strung together. This is what helps move my clients around this idea of power, getting things done. And because so much is negative around power, just think about power as fire. And fire, you could just go burn everything down. But power, also you can feed the whole village. You can light the whole country. And so it's nothing more than a force. And if we get over some of those inhibitions that we rightly have because of the bad examples we see that stick out in our mind, power behind you. I mean, there's so many good people out there who want to see more things happen. Understand how that, use it, exercise it in ways if you feel like that is appropriate for you or you want to do it, and it will make your things happen on like a huge multiplied basis.
Yeah, great. Love the analogy. So rock getting real, the map getting strategic about it, and navigating the waters, being able to navigate those tricky waters, and there will be tricky waters. And when I hear the snowball, I like this get doing or start moving, I also get this picture of momentum. Something that I think about with the snowball effect is that it builds momentum and it keeps going and keeps building. And the final thing I would say with what you were saying just now about that, what can be done with that power, and it's going to be corny, but it's one of my favorite quotes actually, even though it just comes from a movie, Spider-Man. Oh, in fact, it comes deeper than that. I looked at this a while back. I'll have to find the original quote, but with great power comes great responsibility, and use it wisely. Yeah, very good, Michael. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. This has been absolutely wonderful. Oh, you were about to say something else, sir?
Well, just that part around the snowball, because a friend brought this up to me. It was very interesting. He said, oh, that snowballs can get out of control. And I was like, okay, maybe he lives in a place with lots of snow, right, where it can come and be an avalanche. But I think this is the other part of power that people are worried about, right? Icarus. Oh, if I use this, I'm flying too close to the sun, I will get burned. It can be, used in negative ways. And there are parts around power, right? We become disinhibited. We believe that we become arrogant, that we believe everything that we say. And so you do want to think about checks that you put in place and things. Why am I going there? People write down, what are you going to do with the power when you've got it? Because you can start to listen to a smaller inner circle. You can start to ignore certain things or think you are above rules, right? Or laws, which we see sometimes in very flagrant situations. So those are, again, structural things you can put in place. But to go back to the image of Icarus, a lot of people and the listeners out there think that, in terms of power, they're dangerously close if they do something to the sun. But I'd say a lot of people, if we really look at power, they really haven't gotten off the ground, and they would benefit from adapting and learning some of that, because it's going to really help supercharge them.
Yeah, really good, Michael. That's a nice way to summarize it and finish it off. Let's go into our rapid round. So these are the questions that we asked all of our guests, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. What's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
We talked about it. It's the interpersonal part. It is the interpersonal part that I think in the States we do a good job at it. In certain countries, I now live in Spain. I see some of the education my kids get, and it's more about rote memorization and less about presenting interpersonal skills. So I'd say paying attention early to this interpersonal part is really skills to start developing. Yeah,
good one. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Well, this is going to seem kind of out of left field, because I do read business books and psychology books, but It's a Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould, paleontologist, geologist. And I actually use one of his quotes at the beginning, which is, if we look back through time in geology, right, in retrospect, it all kind of makes sense. But what we don't realize is in the moment, kind of one slight change can send history in a very different direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful analogy for not all things are ordained, and what role can we play to nudge or shift things in very dramatic ways.
Yeah, nice one. Very powerful. What's your favorite quote?
This goes back to early in my career in China, setting up private hospital there, the first one, Women and Children's Hospital. And boy, that was tough. And I'm very fond, because it's also what I've seen in terms of change with clients that I've worked. Anthropologist Margaret Mead, She said, never doubt that a small group of dedicated people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
Oh, yeah. That's very powerful. I'm going to be thinking about that one for the rest of the day for sure. And finally, Michael, if there's anybody out there that is looking to get hold of you, they could be an individual looking to understand all of this, or it could be an organization that's looking for your help. How do people get in contact with you?
Sure. My website is the primary mechanism. Chang Wenderoth, CHANG WENDEROTH. We can put in the show notes. But my website there's a way to reach me, a lot of resources. And then following me on LinkedIn, I'm still a little old school, so I use email. But those are the best ways.
I like email. I like email. I still like email. But anyway, maybe I'm old school as well, Michael. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We will indeed put those details in the show notes so that people can find it easily. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been a very thought-provoking conversation today. Thank you for bringing your wisdom and insights and for allowing us to challenge the status quo on this important topic. Really greatly appreciated.
Nick, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. These are fantastic questions, and the dialogue we had here to go in depth on a very important topic to help people. So thank you.
Brilliant. Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've learned together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mixbeers.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.